Grace and peace to you from the one who is, and who was, and who is to come. I found myself staring at my hands. I hadn't given them a second thought until some of the Jerusalem Pharisees demanded that Jesus explain why some of us hadn't ritually washed our hands before we ate. By their reckoning, my dirty hands made me unfit to stand in God's presence. Suddenly, I was very self-conscious of my hands. Since these Pharisees who showed up at dinner were the acknowledged experts in interpreting God's law, they were also the ones who determined how it applied to everyday life. On the whole, they were sincere in their faith and very vocal about how people should live so their lives honor God. Among the many lessons we learn from God's law, one is that every part of life should honor God, from what food is on your table, to how you get ready to worship, to how you conduct business. The Pharisees were the caretakers of that long line of interpretation that said how all these commandments worked in day-to-day life. As we gathered for dinner, these Pharisees from Jerusalem made their way to where we were eating. One of them said to Jesus, "Why don't your students walk according to what's been handed down from our ancestors? But instead, they break bread with defiled hands." Among the many distinctions that Pharisees saw in the Torah and applied to everyday life was the difference between common, the way stuff usually was, and holy, the way stuff was when it was specially set aside for God. Most people were in the common category most of the time, or as the Pharisees put it, they were defiled most of the time. This wasn't about sin, but about showing proper respect for God's presence. The Torah teaches how to move from common to holy, but it also explains that these ritual cleansings were to prepare for standing in God's presence in the temple in Jerusalem. That night, we were far from Jerusalem. As far as I knew, there was no reason for us to ritually wash our hands before we ate. Even so, I still found myself staring at my hands. Could there be a bit of truth to what the Pharisee had said? Was I unfit to stand in God's presence? As I stared at my hands, I thought of all the things those hands had done, and I knew not all of those things honored God. I also knew that God's presence was not limited to the temple. I lived every moment of every day in God's presence. Even if I did give my hands a wash, could I ever get them clean enough to really be fit to stand in God's presence? As I thought about how big of a bowl of water I would need to cleanse my hands, Jesus spoke up. I knew that look on his face. The Pharisees had touched a nerve, and boy, were they going to hear about it in short order. Jesus told them, Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you people who just go through the motions. It's just like it was written. This people might honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far away from me. They honor me in vain, teaching human teachings as commandments. You're letting go of God's commandment and grasping for a human tradition. These Pharisees from Jerusalem were certainly trying to make their own teaching seem like one of God's commandments. The most immediate problem with this attitude is that it shows confusion on the key truth that God is God and we are not. But I sense that Jesus had something deeper in mind as he responded to the Pharisees. Jesus went on, "You do a great job making God's commandment null and void so you can prop up your tradition. Moses said, 'Honor your father and your mother,' and he even said, 'Whoever curses his father or mother must die.' But you say, if someone says to his father or mother, 'Whatever support you might get from me is set aside as a gift for God,' then you let them get away with doing nothing for their father or their mother. So you're setting aside the word of God by your tradition you've handed on. And you do all kinds of things like this." Jesus was pointing the Pharisees and all of us to the difference between God's commandments and so many human traditions. God's commandments are given to guide us so that we honor God through loving one another. Many human traditions come about to benefit the humans who pass that tradition along. God's commandment to honor the father and the mother honors God because it invites you to love others and embody the love that God has for them. Observing this commandment honors God because it blesses others. But the human tradition of using offerings offerings at the temple as a loophole only benefits the person promising the offering. Following this tradition does not honor God, because the person keeping the tradition is only blessing himself. Jesus wanted us to see that God's commandments are about people blessing others, while the human traditions he was condemning were all about people blessing themselves. Jesus went on, "Everyone, listen to me and listen well. There is nothing outside of a person that is even capable of defiling him by going in. But the things that come out of a person are what defile." Jesus made his way back into the house, away from the crowd. Jesus could see the wheels turning in our heads, and all at once we started asking him about what he had just said. I knew this look on his face too. He was getting exasperated with us and looking for a way to break things down so we could get what he was talking about. He said, "Are you really that dim-witted? Don't you understand that whatever goes into a person from the outside can't make him unfit to stand in God's presence? Because it doesn't go into his heart, but into his gut. And from there it just goes out into the latrine." This was definitely not where I had anticipated the dinner conversation going that night. But Jesus was making it clear that what made us clean or defiled, ready to stand in God's presence or not, wasn't about washing hands or cleaning dishes or skipping certain foods. These kinds of things were all about what each of us as individuals did on our own. They might be fine things in themselves. They might even help build up our faith. But they were still just ways that people blessed themselves. Jesus told us what comes out of a person is what makes him unfit to stand in God's presence. Because vile thoughts come from within, from the human heart. Things like harmful intimate relations, theft, murder, adultery, greed, wickedness, deception, debauchery, envy, slander, arrogance, and foolishness. All these vile things come from within, and they are what make a person unfit to stand in God's presence. All those things Jesus named certainly started in people's hearts, and these were certainly things that would make me feel unfit to stand in God's presence. But they were also all behaviors that harmed other people. You can wash your hands all you want, but if you've done something that harms another person, you're not ready to stand in God's presence. Jesus was telling the Pharisees and all of us that when we pour our efforts into trying to make ourselves fit to stand in God's presence, we're missing the point. Jesus would go all the way to the cross to make that point. The point is that we can never make ourselves fit to stand in God's presence, and God knows this. But Jesus took all those things that make us unfit to stand in God's presence to the cross with him, where they died. When God raised him to resurrection life, everything that keeps us from being fit to stand in God's presence stays behind in the tomb. Through his death and resurrection, Jesus freed us from having to worry about keeping our hands clean so we can stand in God's presence. In fact, he sends us to go and get our hands dirty the same way he got his hands dirty, reaching out to the least and the lowest. I learned that night that our faith, the way we live out our trust in God, is deeply personal, but far from private. We don't thank God for Jesus' death and resurrection, making us fit to stand in his presence by putting all of our energy and effort into keeping ourselves clean, but by embodying God's living, loving, life-giving presence to the people God puts in our lives. I found myself staring at my hands again. But instead of feeling self-conscious or ashamed at how dirty they were or worried about washing them, I felt peace and I felt purpose. I felt peace because I knew that Jesus was the one who really makes my hands clean. I felt purpose because I knew Jesus also sent me into the world to get my hands dirty the same way he got his hands dirty, feeding the hungry, caring for the sick, and bearing the burdens of people in need. I looked at my hands one more time, and then at Jesus' hands, and I felt joy, because I knew my life wasn't in my but in His. Thanks be to God.